into account everything, not just isolated pictures, but what this presentation I really think starts to do is it paints a picture of the impacts of COVID on the whole $200 million city operation. And when you do that, you see that there are all sorts of holes that it has created in our enterprise funds, as well as the general fund. And because of impacts on the way we had planned out our capital planning, we have very significant holes in the capital budget as well, if we want to keep up the pace of investment that we've had in recent years. So if there's discomfort, as I suspect there could be with the level of ARPA investment that we're proposing in this kind of first cut, that's fine. I'm uncomfortable with it. I was hoping we would not need to dip as far into it as we're suggesting here. But to do that, we're going to have to avoid that. I think what this presentation, I think accurately lays out to the best that we can at this moment is that something else is going to have to give. One of the other principles and goals is going to have to give if we're going to try to reserve more of that funding for future years or for future kind of deliberative process. So with that, I think that's enough for our opening remarks. I hope we can hold on to a sense of excitement about where we're headed as well. It's certainly a much different task than we faced a year ago. I hope when you look at the list of things, and I know you haven't had a lot of time with it, and we're going to go over it again in this PowerPoint, I hope you see the potential, at least, for making progress on a long list of equity priorities and other city goals that have eluded us for some time. This really could be, fundamentally, I think this is an exciting time. We're going to have some challenges figuring out exactly how to do this, but I am totally confident we will come through this headed from a financial perspective in a much different direction, a much superior direction to where we were 12 months ago. So with that, Catherine, why don't you try to kick us off and start to lead us through this. If people, I think you should ask, let's try to get through the whole PowerPoint, but I also think you should ask questions, particularly clarifying questions as we go that will help inform the debate and discussion at the end of this. Just raise your hand. We'll get you in there for questions. We have invited the full council to be with us tonight. I see a number of counselors have taken us up on that, and other counselors should also feel free to ask questions tonight and be part of the discussion. Well, that would be great. So with that, Catherine, really this time, I'm handing it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Mayor. Without further ado, we will go through the high points and kind of a summary of the memo that was presented to set up the dialogue and conversation that the mayor spoke about. And as he mentioned, the first place we started was the budget principles. As we did last year, we felt that it's important to set the stage with what are the overarching principles that will serve us throughout this process. As you can see, we are calling it a full service budget compared to the lean budget we had last year. And we also have some strategic new investment that we are proposing. And so one of the big assumptions that we have made is that all city services are going to be restored to pre-pandemic levels. And that, as we'll talk about later in the presentation, includes everything from seasonal hiring to investment in training and education for staff, and all sorts of things that, as you will recall, we had to cut last year because of the unusual circumstances. Another one of the principles is investment in critical infrastructure and the fact that we really do need to continue that at the pre-pandemic enhanced levels that we have all enjoyed over the past few years. We want to make sure that we have emergency reserves at that upper limit of 15% in case there is additional economic uncertainty in FY23. In this budget, we have done our best to minimize tax increases, understanding the uneven nature of the economic recovery and that many people are still hurting. That said, we feel that it is critical to make investments in racial equity and justice, the language access program, and livable wages in this budget. We'll also talk a bit about the municipal enterprise funds. They are severely impacted and they may require support. And as the mayor said, in order to meet the rest of these principles, significant ARPA funds will be necessary.
Let's pause there, Catherine, before we go on, and just, just curious if there are any questions, just any discussion of the principles to start things off, anything that seems like it's badly missing. Councilor Paul.
My only question at this point is just simply, when you're talking about investment in critical infrastructure, where does the state play into this, and how? Well, I guess I'll just leave it at that. Where is the state played into this? I mean, they are going to be doing some infrastructure on the state level. Obviously, we don't want to be duplicating anything. Is there any update about that? Or is that later in this presentation? And if it is, I'm happy to wait.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think why don't we do have, I think it might be easier to get into when we have the specific areas in front of us. And I see we do have many department heads who are here with us who may be able to speak. If we want to get into detailed questions when we get there, we have some of the experts on the line to speak to the projects and the prospect of alternative funding. So
okay,
that's coming. Councilor Jang.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I am a little bit confused here because it seems we're talking about the FY 2022 budget principles and without the ARPA funds, or is it included, or is ARPA included in this proposal as well?
Yes, so we, one of the main purposes of ARPA, of course, is, as I understand ARPA, they're trying to do the federal government is really trying to, at some level, do two big things with ARPA. One, they are recognizing that municipalities and some state governments have been severely hit by economically by the pandemic, and will be what I reported to the federal government and most other mayors, not every other mayor, but many cities reported to the federal government that without federal assistance, we would have no choice but to continue to severely restrict our budgets and if it continued beyond this year, seriously consider significant layoffs and certainly not return to normal times. So one of the things the federal government, explicitly, one of the four big things they have made clear is appropriate uses of ARPA funds is to replace lost revenue so that cities can carry on normal operations and be strong during this time of pandemic and now coming out of the pandemic economic recovery, and not worsen that economic recovery by laying people off ourselves. So that's one big thing. Second big thing is to really help with the recovery by doing not typical things, going beyond our normal operations. So yes, I do not think there is any way to pass anything short of a draconian budget without the use of some ARPA funds in the FY22 budget. I think that we tried to be clear about that the first time we talked about ARPA funds. We didn't have a sense for the magnitude of what would be needed. And that is why we said previously we would be appropriating ARPA funds in essentially two big stages. Some during the FY22 budget, as much as possible would be separated and not used in the FY22 budget, and would be appropriated through a separate process. I don't see any path through this without use of some. I think we do have quite a bit of discretion about how much we want to use in FY22 and how much we want to decide through a later process. And really that's, in its essence, that's what this presentation is about, is how much ARPA funds are we going to use to get through FY22? How much are we going to put in a separate process? And I hope by the end of this presentation, you'll have a lot more clarity about what the choices we have in front of us are that will determine that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think we all, I agree, and I think that we all need the ARPA fund, to support some city services for sure. But my concern here is about the approach we want to take in using the ARPA fund. I would rather have the presentation from the enterprise funds, what is missing, what are the gaps, and then we have the discussion about how much from ARPA we are going to allocate to those gaps. We do the same thing with the capital fund as well. And we do the same thing with the general fund. Where are the gaps? And then we can talk about how do we utilize ARPA in filling those gaps. But it seems with this, there is a preconceived notion about where ARPA will already go. And to me, it doesn't seem inclusive, and it seems I'm here to just listen, which I'm here to do.
Okay.
Just wanted to bring that up.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Jang. My hope is that you leave tonight with, I think with exactly that, with a sense of where the gaps are. We do have the enterprise funds leadership are with us on this call, and when we get to it later in this slide deck, we can hear from them. But there are gaps. There are gaps everywhere. There are gaps in the operating budget. There are gaps in the capital budget. There are gaps in the enterprise funds. And so that's you're going to get a much better picture of that when we come at it over the next hour plus. So let's keep it. Let's go on to the next sheet and let's get to some of that detail, Catherine. Oh, sorry, President Tracy, did you want to get in at this point?
Yeah, just wanted to understand how, given that there's a number of new investments, how you're dealing with the question of like sustainability in future budget years as it relates to these kinds of things, specifically like some of the overdue investments, and how you're seeing us being able to make those investments sustainable over time. And then just wanting a little bit further clarification on what the livable wage piece means. I'm sorry if I missed that, but that was one piece that and maybe it's later, but that was one piece that I was hoping to get a little bit more detail on. Thank you.
Absolutely. We do have a bullet point on it later, but and you'll see in the memo as well on the livable wage. We are, and I see Councilor Freeman is with us. We've kind of plugged in that gap that we identified last time we looked at this together, and we're proposing basically paying all city employees livable wage, and bring inclusive of the temporary and seasonal employees who up until now have not been part of that. How do we afford this all long term? We did lay out a other set of principles around the use of ARPA funds that I do want to hold ourselves to. To the degree we are using ARPA funds to fill this budget, I do think we should speak to what the long-term sustainability is with it. In some cases, the gaps in the operating budget are caused by one-time issues that I think, that's the plan for we need to have a plan for all the gaps here. And it depends on the item, and we'll speak about that tonight. And I'm sure we'll speak about that more over the course of this budget process. There needs to be a long-term plan.
Okay, thank you so much, Mayor.
That plan may include at some point there needing to be additional revenues raised on a permanent basis. So that will be on the table in some cases from my perspective. Councilor Pine.
Yeah, I think that it's really related very much to what you just discussed and what Councilor Tracy asked about, which is, as a guiding principle, I think you would normally say, I think we could all agree that one-time money shouldn't be spent on ongoing obligations, right? That's just sort of a general rule. But I think things are a little different, and I think it's more nuanced than that. It's not as easy to just apply that rule to where we are now. So I just want to sort of put that out there, mention it, and ask if you could do that sort of more nuanced examination of where we have gaps that are normally not gaps you would fill with this one-time federal infusion, because we're going to need to keep doing them on an ongoing basis. And so you dig yourself a little bit of a hole, but I think we're in a unique situation coming out of a pandemic, and because of these other revenue sources being so really low compared to where they would normally be. So I just want to put that out, that I think that's really worth being very explicit about.
I think we wholeheartedly agree with you, Councilor Pine. When we articulated, and we didn't just like repeat the principles that we spent a past Board of Finance with meeting with before, where we said, here are the principles for ARPA. But one of them, the way we articulated was not the one-time money should only be spent on one-time uses. It was, if it is going to be an ongoing use, there needs to be a sustainability plan. It was something, I think we worded it slightly more artfully, but yes, I think there are what we are proposing, taking on in this budget, some commitments that are likely to be structural long-term commitments. We are proposing filling holes in this budget using ARPA funds. I think we should be explicit over the course of this budget process about which ones will need ultimate additional revenues to create them, and I think that's on the table, that we plan for those raising additional revenues downstream. Okay, so great. Let's go on to the next page, Catherine.
You've pretty much, everyone has set me up for future slides, so I will not rush us through, but I will get us through, because you obviously have great questions. We probably have not anticipated them all, but hopefully many of them. This is a slide that shows the changes in our general fund revenues that are expected for FY22. I want to be clear, this is not all of the changes. These are the really big ones. And that you'll see in the third column from the left, we used FY20 as our base because FY21, as you know, was a very unusual year. So that did not provide a good base. So what we did was we took FY20, we added inflation for FY21 and FY22, and you will see that in the column. Those are the expenses if we just spent FY20 plus inflation, what we would spend. So what you see here, sorry, this is revenue. It's been a really long day. What we would expect not to spend, to take in. But because of COVID, you'll see that we are still projecting next year that will be about $1 million off in parks and revenue. There's a lot going on in terms of camps, waterfront, various events. Gross receipts will probably not bounce back. And we also see big impacts in parking services and permitting and inspections.
I just want to interject quickly, just sort of big picture what we're doing here to help counselors following along. These are what we hope to kind of convince you of. What we are feeling here is that on both, we have problems in the operating budget on both the revenue and the expense side. On the revenue side, the ongoing effects of COVID are still, we're assuming they're still real for the year ahead. Maybe there'll be I'm actually increasingly hopeful that some of our assumptions may be conservative. I had a phone call with a hotel group on Friday, and bookings are definitely starting to pick up. You've seen some of the news about new flights and whatnot. Like, the economy is starting to come back, but is it going to come back enough to catch up for 2 years of essentially falling behind? Are we going to get to where you would expect the economy to have grown over two budget years? Probably not. We're planning for it not to be, and we're thinking our revenues are going to be down by millions. On the expense side, however, the expenses, we are planning a budget that assumes that the expenses will be up. And so between those two things, and you'll see the expenses in a moment, between those two things, we will have a very substantial gap because of those two factors.
Thank you, Mayor. Before we get to the increased expenses, I do want to point out we do have some new resources that we are assuming in this budget. We'll talk later about some one-time investment that needs to happen in REIB. So as we have 432,000 left of the 1 million appropriated last year, we propose carrying that over to take care of those one-time costs. We do plan on implementing the 3-cent public safety tax that was approved in March 2020. And then, of course, there are the ARPA funds, of which I list the total. We are not going to use the total, but it's there. Then let's talk about some of the good news here.
So I just, before you go further, obviously that's a discretionary choice, the implementation of this voter approved tax. We could, again, make a decision not to implement that increase this year as we chose last year. That is a discretionary choice of the council. It will make our challenge $1 million too harder if we defer that for another year. We are proposing deferring for another year the implementation of the new 1 cent housing trust fund tax. And we are proposing that after discussion. So why are we doing that? We're proposing it, well, because of the principle we're trying to minimize property tax increases. The same reason we didn't go to voters for new revenues, new authority this March. We are confident we can do this and postpone this for another year and have no material impact on our ability to advance affordable housing efforts over the next year. In that, this is going to be an exceptional year. There's going to be just an enormous amount of federal and state dollars available for affordable housing efforts over the next at least year and possibly more. We consulted with Michael Monti of Champlain Housing Trust before making this proposal, and he was supportive of and said he would be happy to, he's happy for that to be represented publicly of a deferral for a year, given the broader context and the fact that we will have this abundance of affordable housing resources, it appears, over the next year. So in that way, we just want to call that out there before we go further.
Thank you. These are some of the items that we have restored. These are items that we did cut last year, as you may recall, to deal with the lean budget that we were facing because of the pandemic. We're calling it a full service budget because we really were able to do all of the basics last year, but as you will recall, we pretty much cut things down to the bone. So this restores items that were really cut hard in FY21 back to their FY20 levels. Importantly, it ensures that seasonal employees are back to their pre-pandemic levels. It also brings both city council funds, the initiative funds, and the early learning initiative back to the budgeted levels from FY20. And there is money included for all of the community festivals and events that we've come to love. July 3rd, Highlight, the International Film Festival, all of the arts festivals. All of that is included. And then we're pleased to roll out some new and expanded programs and equity initiatives. So the mayor spoke about the first one, that is paying all city workers the livable wage, whether they technically qualify in the ordinance or not. We've used the estimate that was presented to City Council at the very end of 2019 for that, and had discussions with all of the affected departments. I think this is an excellent decision for a lot of reasons. And the time is right because hiring has been difficult for those positions, and it's something we've wanted to do for a while. We are proposing a significant expansion of the REIB department, and we're excited about that. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the new positions slide. We're funding economic recovery. If you're not sure what economic recovery is, that's all the work that Cara has been doing with businesses across the city. We are reducing limited service positions. So we have performed a complete review across the city to make sure everyone is classified as they should be. And anyone who was in a limited service position who we really feel should be regular will be classified as such in this new budget. So will be very few limited service positions. We also have the first full year of operating the third ambulance. So that's exciting. And restrooms. We have heard from you and we have heard from the public that it's important that all of our restrooms be open for an expanded season. So Cindy is budgeting for that. We are also putting extra money in the HR budget to make sure that we are doing diverse and inclusive hiring for all of our hires, and that costs some money to send it out to some of those places. We are more purposefully budgeting for staffing city council committees. You may have had this experience where each department doesn't always have the money that we wish they had for that, so we will make sure that is done. A new policy that we have in draft form that's an important part of the equity initiative and brought to us by Taisha is the need to compensate board and commission members to be able to attract especially BIPOC members to those boards. So we have modeled this on the state of Vermont policy and included an estimate for those costs in this budget. We are funding the language access plan at an increased amount to the tune of $40,000. We also have increased money for trusted community voices. And then just a quick note that we know that the BPD budget is an important discussion. We are not ready for that just yet, but we do plan when BPD presents their departmental budget that it will reallocate the savings from the reduced officer count to hiring CSOs as was approved by the council, CSLs, and possibly other public safety measures. So we will have a separate discussion on that. And here is a list of all of the new general fund positions that we were thinking about. As you will see, there is quite an expansion in REIB. And I see that Taisha is here. So if you have questions, I'm sure she can help answer them. But we are proposing for an equal opportunity specialist that is to really help BIPOC businesses to be able to grow and to compete for city work, a racial equity data analyst. And then, as you know, one of the mandates of the department has been an anti-racism curriculum for all city employees. And that is a big lift. Taisha and her team have come up with an amazing plan, and that involves hiring one manager and then 8 limited service employees, facilitators who would help us over the course of a year to do the big lift of the first training. But we do not envision them being regular full-time employees. I think those are just needed for this first push. In other departments, oh, go ahead, Mayor.
I just want to further flesh out the picture of change within REIB. in the coming year. In addition to what Catherine laid out, they're not new positions because of past approvals, but we have created and currently have in the IT department 2 public health positions. We are proposing that those public health positions also shift into the REIB department. So in total, we will, and really with a large part of their job being focused on the racism as a public health emergency. You add all that up, and the total change in the second year of this new department's life would be to go to from the 3-person team it is now, there'd be 8 permanent members of the team funded through the budget that we're proposing.
Excellent. Some of the other departments with needs you can see here. The CEDO needs an ELI coordinator. This is not a full-time position, and the salary will come out of the allocation, the $500,000 allocation. Economic recovery, Cara's team has a lot envisioned. We'll talk more about that next Monday, but they need an administrative coordinator to help them pull all of the pieces together for what they're envisioning. BPD, after discussion with the commission, is asking for a redaction specialist so that they can get out, respond to public requests, and get out videos in the body camera footage in a quicker way. I hope I'm getting this right, John. You can follow up if I'm not, but I think I have this right. This is really to respond to what the commission has asked for in terms of more transparency with the body cam footage that we have. And we just don't have somebody, it's a very labor intensive process. So in order to meet what the commission has asked for, we would need another person for that. In human resources, we are asking for another manager. Our needs have certainly grown, and as we prepare to have both the anti-racism training as well as bringing people back to work after a year, that's going to bring up a lot of things, and we are all envisioning increased demand for HR. We are at the beginning of a process of revising our personnel policy manual. We are trying to get the HR information system out. So there's a lot of demands on HR, and we envision those really continuing. It's kind of a similar story for IT. I couldn't believe when I got here that for the entire city, we had 1 help desk professional. It's not reasonable. And that really came to a head during COVID. We have someone in a temporary position now, and it has been a lifesaver, frankly, and that is a position that we really need to have be full-time. In parks, we are proposing 2 urban park rangers, and this is frankly to deal with some of the services that the police are no longer able to provide now that they are not as robustly staffed. These park rangers would help with education on fires at the beach, dogs off leash, graffiti, and other important quality of life issues. And then lastly, as I believe everyone knows, unfortunately, David White will be moving on from the Director of Planning position as department head, but he would like to stay on as a senior planner, and we would really like him to stay on as a senior planner. So we'd like to create that position, but so that's what that's for.
So
Yes, we're on.
just, a couple quick
Please.
supplemental notes. The ELI coordinator, that is a new position, but it is not entirely a new expense from the perspective that basically this is us taking in-house some of the functions that Let's Grow Kids has provided for the city in the early years of the ELI program. That is really something that is necessary. We think this is the right way to do it. We also, Let's Grow Kids, as part of their kind of organizational evolution, they're phasing themselves out, so they're no longer in position to do that work. We think this is the right way to proceed with it. And then just the one additional thing I want to point out, I actually don't think the news about David White has been widely announced
Sorry.
yet. And I know he's planning on speaking to his commission about that next week. So announcement is forthcoming soon.
Whoops.
But if, I know this is a public meeting, but it doesn't, we'd welcome being able to roll that out properly in the weeks, over the next week or so, if people can kind of stay. Anyways, you understand what I'm saying.
Well, there's that. So sorry. Okay, I'm sorry, David. Let's keep moving. People are giving me the glazed over look and look like they're looking at their phones. So, this is an interesting slide, although maybe difficult to read. Poor Max is like, I gotta go in and look at this one. No, I know the numbers are too small. I'm sorry, I tried. These are increases in general fund expenses. And as you'll see, I followed the same methodology of using FY20 as a base and adding a little bit for inflation. So what you'll see here is where we have made significant improvements that go beyond inflation. And we wanted to call those out to you here. And I will not go through them, but we are happy to take questions on them. And then moving on to capital, as the mayor noted in his memo, due to COVID, we decided not to go for a bond last year. And so there's so much capital improvement work that we are building on, and we don't want to lose that progress. But I have really learned that capital work is extremely expensive, and you can see that reflected in this slide. But these represent really important things. Being able to pave 3 miles of sidewalk instead of 1 is something that's critical to our goals of being a net zero city and really being a walkable city. The bike path, ditto, something that's very important to us. And some of these expenses, like under transportation planning, are items that the state of Vermont is paying the vast sum of, but there still is a small cost share. And when you add it up for all the projects, that's where we get. So it's a little bit over $6 million. And I do want to be clear, that's a large amount of money, but that's really just the bridge to get us between here and the next bond for sustainable infrastructure. And let's talk about our friends in the enterprise funds. As Moreau talked about, many of them have been hit really hard. And so far, the airport is the only one who has received a large chunk of dedicated funds. You will recall we've been talking about the traffic and parking fund at the past several Board of Finance meetings. They're in the midst of a reorg, and they have several parts of their plan to be able to put them back on track. But one thing that would really help is $1 million infusion for these operating costs and some minor capital improvements. We are also recommending that for both BED and water resources, we allocate the money here. We still have significant arrearages in customer payments. You can see in the memo, there have been state programs aimed at helping to alleviate this for various reasons. Either money has run out or there's very strict criteria. So they will not help our population. So we are recommending another $1 million go to BED and water resources. And then we'd like further conversation. You probably saw in the memo, there was a lot of revenue lost. Water and wastewater up to 1.3 and BED north of $2 million. And that doesn't need to be acted on immediately, but it is something that we need to keep in mind as we think about the big picture here. So this is kind of the summary chart as we get to the end here of what all of the different places we have proposed potentially using ARPA funds, the general fund, capital, as we introduced last week, and we'll talk about next week, the immediate needs under economic support and RRC to meet the principle of our unassigned fund balance. It would take another $1 million to get to the 15%, and then the city enterprise funds. Almost at the end here. You guys are doing great. Next steps. This is just laying out, to remind us, this is just the first discussion. We have a regular Board of Finance next week, and then we have the 4 budget meetings between the 12th and the 20th to go through each departmental budget. And then you can see on the slide these other deadlines, and I'm really hoping we don't have to go to June 30th for taking action on the mayor's budget again, but we have built in a little flexibility just in case. And now we are ready for your feedback, questions, discussion, what have you, and I will turn it back over to the mayor. Thank you. Great.
Thank you, Catherine. Why don't we keep the PowerPoint shared in case people want to go back to earlier. Is there anything else on the PowerPoint people want to kind of dive back into? It would be helpful to have it up. Well, we'll have it there in case so. I think we've done a lot of talking. We've hopefully painted the kind of broad picture. The floor is open for reactions, strategic thoughts on priorities, detailed questions about anything you've heard. So the floor is open. Councilor Pine.
Yeah, as we know, the ARPA legislation was approved without Republican support. It was done through reconciliation. And there's some talk about whether infrastructure will also have to go that route, because the president's plan is a $2 trillion infrastructure plan. Republicans in the Senate are balking, and in the House, but they're more important in the Senate in terms of votes. But if the administration gets either that or the pared down version, which is something like $600 billion in infrastructure is what the Republicans are talking about. So I'm just wondering if that infrastructure, if it becomes law, would we still need to put a little over $6 million into our local projects, or would we have the potential for a windfall of federal dollars for infrastructure.
Great. Yeah. Why don't we go back to that infrastructure slide, Catherine, and kind of unpack what's in the capital budget. So my sense of the timeline for that bill, Councilor Pine, although Councilor Paul's question spoke to this infrastructure as well before. I have heard the president say he hopes to make substantial progress on that bill by Memorial Day. There was, I think, Speaker Pelosi talked about passage by the 4th of July, but also I think in the same breath, or maybe I heard it almost in the same breath, there was sort of speculation that could easily slip. We certainly saw how the first round of municipal funds, there was discussions about that as early as early summer last year, and it took until March for that actually to be approved. And we're still waiting for clarity on exactly how we can use all these dollars. So I think, what does that all mean? Realistically, I don't think we will know what, if any, implications that bill will have on this set of projects laid out here by the time we need to make decisions about the FY22 budget. In fact, that first item, which in some ways I see as one of the most critical and sensitive, and really the heart of the opportunity cost here, is that $2 million for streets and sidewalks. We will need actually to be able to get that work done this construction season. We have put ourselves in the position to be able to do this work this construction season. We're out to bid with this work. And we will need to make a decision whether or not we want to actually buy this full amount of work by the end of May in order to keep the schedule and make sure all this weather sensitive work can be done before the snow flies. Again, I think everyone, it's been a joint accomplishment that I think we've all felt good about, that, it is hard to get 3 miles of sidewalk built a year. Just the volume of doing it, all the work involved is challenging. I would hate, it would be a shame in some ways, I think, to miss a construction season of these elevated levels, knowing how deep a hole we're in with sidewalks. So I think we will not get that work done this summer if we're waiting for federal funds. Similarly, the bike path will not get finished this summer if we wait to see whether federal funds can supplement it. Additional federal funds, right? I mean, these are federal funds that really we're talking about using here. This is intended, I believe, as we get in, when we come back and present this budget in detail in one of the budget sessions, I will confirm this, but everything on here is supposed to be time sensitive work that if we don't approve it either soon, by the end of this budget season, we will not get it done before the end of the calendar year. And some of it I think probably could defer without the same kind of impact as, for example, same kind of impact on the public as deferring sidewalks or deferring the bike path. But if we want to have a really robust season in all these areas, this is what it will take.
And if I could just follow up, the governor's ARPA plan has a decent chunk, not enough statewide for sure, but 30 million in for CSO abatement. And I'm wondering whether we can get some access to that, which isn't even on this list, but it's a need that Megan's going to answer that question. I see she's ready to roll on that. So.
Yeah, no, they do have some money, and I've been looking at the capital bill to make sure that it's in there, the budget bill. That is for CSO. The majority of the money that's identified here is for water work. Ideally, an emergency generator at our water plant, which we do not have. The establishment of a interconnect valve so that we're able to receive water from Champlain Water District should our treatment plant ever fail. security projects, SCADA, PLC upgrade at water. Right now, as far as I can tell, within the governor's budget, there is no line item dedicated for water. The other thing with the federal money, we're obviously keeping a close eye on that. We don't know yet what form that's going to take. And in my experience, a lot of times it comes in the forms of at least a portion of it being loans. And that's going to start to pinch our debt, our debt service capacity. The other piece I'm going to add, and it's not settled, I have heard through the grapevine that there's a potential that for local money that we spend on state priorities, infrastructure priorities, that could be a potential match from the state. So that would be another reason in my mind to use this opportunity to do some really key projects, that will then not have to go on the bond ask that we have in November, which, is going to potentially be fairly substantial between water, wastewater, and stormwater for dealing all of our existing infrastructure, as well as making these improvements for Lake Champlain, as well as for our water system.
Thank you. And then I don't want to miss this opportunity to point out that we have Senator Leahy chairing appropriations, and we have Senator Sanders chairing the budget committee, which handles budget reconciliation. So now is really the time to be thinking, pretty big and boldly about what we could use locally to address our issues. I think both of them would be very supportive of anything we can do to continue to invest in ways to reduce our contribution to pollution in the lake.
I agree.
Further questions or comments? President Tracy.
So I'm just wanting to know, and this kind of goes hand in hand with what Councilor Pine was just raising, was really just kind of a broader, or like some analysis provided on how the budget addresses the climate emergency, and how we're just being explicit about that and really putting it through that lens and presenting it through that lens, so that counselors and the public know where we are investing, and then as a result of that, like if there are things that we haven't thought of, that they're able to bring those ideas and those concepts forward. But I think having some sort of summary or some sort of bringing together, because I see a lot of different disparate elements here that could be under that kind of frame of thinking, but we'd really like to see just holistically how you're conceiving of it. And then the second piece really being that of process, and just wanting to understand how, we had a process last year that was very challenging just for a variety of reasons. But I think one of the things that was challenging was both for members of the public as well as counselors, was like knowing when to offer their feedback and how you're considering bringing in public feedback. Because looking at that slide, it looks pretty much like what we've done in the past, which, a series of budget sessions, not really additional sessions with public input or other things like that. Understanding that there will be public comments at those periods, but I'm just wondering if there might be possibility for bringing some additional public comments into this, and some additional outreach to members of the public to really let them know what is in their budget. And then also specifically to counselors, just wanting to understand when in this process you think it would be helpful for counselors to offer any specific amendments that they have, because I heard frustration on both sides last year coming out of the process saying, people shouldn't be offering little amendments at the last minute, but then counselors who offered amendments saying, well, wait a second, we never really had clear guidance as to when the appropriate time would be for us to offer those amendments. And so just wanting to diagnose those dynamics early on, specifically with public participation, and welcome additional participation, but then also just be very clear with counselors about, when ideally we would like to see those things, just so that there isn't that frustration kind of repeated, and we're able to hopefully better address feedback that counselors have on specific line items before we get to hopefully that last night where we're having to adopt the budget.
Thank you, President Tracy. Let me try to respond to some of that. Some of it I'll just take under advisement, and I think it's a good point. And I think we can, as a follow-up to this, highlight there are some relevant climate emergency items, and I think we could capture them all in one place. I also think, mindful that I think there is a desire for a deliberative, public engaged process around this sort of historic, these one-time funds. I think some potential climate investments, I would think might rise to the top in that remaining period as well. But we will come back with some more detail on what's in here on climate. In terms of counselor feedback, we, in addition to this PowerPoint, you now have received, and we would like to have gotten it out sooner, but it is out now, and is an extensive memo that really, I think, hopefully captures at this, I think, important conceptual level, the way in which we're trying to put the budget together. And again, as I said at the beginning here, I would welcome feedback in response, when you've had a chance to look at that written document, feedback on that now, on whether we're kind of getting the principles right would certainly be, we're at the part of the process where it's easiest to make changes. Certainly these upcoming the council will be invited to. The purpose of these 4 meetings is which we didn't have last year, and I think that did contribute to the frustrations last year, is to really give counselors a chance to really try to understand what is going on in each of the departmental budgets, ask some questions, and not a ton of time for questions, but between the presentations themselves and follow up from that, I think in other years we have had good exchange there. And certainly throughout over the course of May, feedback questions, we have a lot of ability to make adjustments and change to anything we get over the course of May. Once you start getting into June, it does get harder to make, we start locking things in, and it gets harder to make further adjustments. So that would be, I think ideally we are providing the resources for counselors to give us meaningful feedback tonight and over the course of the month. You have raised before, President Tracy, I think it's fair. Is there something more we could do beyond the and I see Channel 17 is here with us tonight, and has become a custom of ours, transparency step to have all of these broadcasts, these budget meetings taped and broadcast, and that is, but I hear the desire to go beyond that. Certainly, it is our intent to go beyond that with the balance of the effort for the ARPA funds. What is the best way to do it beyond written communications? I still struggle with what exactly is the best way to engage the public here. And if you think having some kind of town hall meeting in early June or something might be helpful, I'd be open to that. I'd welcome specific feedback from counselors about what kind of additional public engagement and when you think might make sense. Councilor Paul.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So I think given what President Tracy has said, I think that waiting until, and not to suggest that you were saying waiting, but certainly having that kind of opportunity for the public in June, I think probably is probably a little bit late in the process. I think doing it a little bit sooner would probably be best. That would, just to finish up that thought. So there were a couple of things that I had questions on. So last year in June or in July, we allocated $1 million to the Racial Justice Fund. If there's 432 left over or from last year, so that would be carried over. And I think, I feel as though we are not doing justice to what we really intended for that fund. It was $1 million. I can't speak to why the other 432 was not allocated to efforts in the FY21 year. It could have something to do with COVID. I really don't know the answer to that. But if we allocated $1 million to last year, then we're taking 400 from last year and bringing it into this year. I feel as though that's not the intention of that. That wasn't really the intention. And you creating a carryover without replenishing that in some way seems sort of counter to what the intent was. So I just would mention that. And then in the slide that you had about where you mentioned BPD, and you had said that it was the CSO, there were the reallocate savings to hiring CSOs and CSLs. And then I think Catherine had said something in other public safety initiatives, or I'm not sure exactly how she put that. I would like to have as part of that discussion, and you mentioned that in your State of the City address, is the cahoots model. And we have some idea of what the overall cost in broad numbers is going to be. You had one meeting with the group that has organized that. And I would like to just make sure that whatever we do, and I don't know what the funds will be. I don't know if you have an idea of what when you say reallocate savings from attrition, if you have an idea of what that broad amount is going to be, but that be a focal part of, moving public safety forward. I think they have a compelling model and would like to see us further that, as I think we all would. And then the only other question I had was just simply when you do go and do the facilities, it said Memorial, Miller, the BCA Firehouse. There were several others. Memorial, Miller, 339 Pine, Boathouse. And I would like to know what that $1.1 million, what the breakdown of that is when we are able to.
Absolutely. So yes, the capital, all of, when we get the night that focuses on the capital budget, that detail will be there. Similarly with the police budget, we will be able to show you what we are anticipating in terms of attrition and what the opportunities are for reallocation. And certainly, yes, the cahoots model remains of significant interest to me and others, and is definitely one of the things that captured in Catherine's point about other possible investments. In terms of, I hope the presentation was ultimately clear that we are, contemplating a very substantial additional allocation of new monies towards racial justice initiatives. So I think we are renewing fully and expanding really our commitment to racial justice financially in this budget, and really locking ourselves in, frankly, in a way that we didn't last year, to ongoing it becoming part of the structural budget with a department of 8. And, I certainly think, certainly looking back on 2020, the last fiscal year 21, I certainly, as I I think we made that allocation explicitly, not knowing how we were going to spend it, and that was and I think we did move through it and launch numerous new initiatives, and I think that has put us in position for in the second year of the REIB department to really accelerate and get done quite a bit more. But happy to take further. I know this is a serious, major interest of yours as well, Councillor Paul, and happy to take additional feedback on thoughts on where we could go with this discussion. Certainly, again, none of this is locked in at this point, and I think this could go in numerous different directions given the opportunities in front of us. Councillor Jang.
Thank you. My first question is basically for both Mayor and Catherine, and was just wondering if the one-call consultant in front of us here that augment staff resources was this exact line item that the Board of Finance approved at our last meeting. Is it the same or is it different? And I remember I voted against it.
It is.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. It is different, and I believe that it might be helpful for us to have Martha Keenan, who is here, just to describe a little bit about that and how it's different.
So for the last 3 years, the council approved on-call consultants to help with the initiative of the infrastructure bond that we had. And this is the continuation of it. It is to be fiscally responsible. We didn't add staff. We used consultants to cover some of our added work. And so this is to continue using consultants to aid our staff in getting the work done of the various capital projects.
So basically it was not part of your budget and you're requesting it as a gap here.
It is a part of the overall capital budget request. So it is not an operating budget, it is a capital request.
Thank you. Thank you, Martha. Yeah, so I mean, in general about the presentation, and I think I agree with Councillor Paul somewhere where the breakdown of the facility, $1.1 million, and we still have one item here, same thing, with the streets and sidewalk, not knowing exactly where and when and who, just 2 million in gaps. Was just wondering if there is a breakdown too about what area of the cities that requires that.
So yes.
Yeah, I believe it would be helpful. Martha, why don't you talk about streets, sidewalks, and then a quick breakdown on facilities as well. I see Councillor Paul is back, so I think that would be helpful.
Sure. For the streets and sidewalks, Laura Wheelock actually has a work plan that lists all of the different streets and sidewalks that would be accomplished with this added money. And it is covered throughout the city. So it does go to all of the different neighborhoods. But I can actually have her get that work plan to you because it's very specific to it. For the facilities, this is got a contingency in it, but Memorial's boilers have died. They were in 1958 boilers, and so they're 63 years old, and they have finally totally died and are not able to get through next winter. So at this point, they would need to be replaced, or we need to have a better understanding of what's going to happen with the building. We have 339 Pine is occupied and has significant needs. Miller, some of these items are to help with ventilation related to the pandemic. So Miller is a recreation building and their windows don't open. So it's to replace the windows with windows that open to improve the ventilation. The Firehouse Gallery, being a historic building, the windows are in severe need of being rehabilitated. And we're only doing one side at a time. So it's budgeted for one side. And the boathouse, the barge is in very serious condition. And the monies there are to do a feasibility study of what's the best way to manage that. Do we replace the barge and let it stay on water, or do we determine that that's not the best move and move it onto solid land? And so the money that is allocated there is to make that choice, or help us make that choice. It also holds a $500,000 contingency in it for other items that might fail. We had $500,000 this year that was allocated for contingency in facilities, and we have fully used it this year. So until we can get a new bond and be able to address some other items, this is to carry us through.
Thank you so much, Martha. I also see that we have our chief engineer with us, and I wanted to invite you, Norm, in case you have more details on streets and sidewalks that you wanted to provide.
Yeah, so we just put out the bid for paving. We have our base paving bid, and then we have bid alternatives. That those bid alternatives include the additional monies that's being suggested in this budget. And the list that I had, and it may have changed as we refine the list, but is Ferguson, Depot Street, Allen Street, and Birchcliff. And I would note Birchcliff is, we're trying to coordinate the traffic calming effort that goes with Birchcliff with some of that repaving effort for Birchcliff for later in the season following the traffic calming work. And I would also note that the on-call consultant work is really necessary to support those projects. For instance, the traffic calming for Birchcliff, it really does require civil design work that we don't have space within our team to do. Without it, that traffic calming would have to sit and wait. And so those are the kind of examples of how these consultants can be used. And as Martha had noted, I've expressed for the longest time that, you know, we're dealing with a backlog of significant capital work that needs to be addressed. And last thing I want to do is have to build a team that once that backlog is addressed, suddenly we have to lay people off. So we are working very diligently with the staff we have, but using the consultants as a force multiplier to get all the things that we need to get done. And there are significant amount of effort and metrics going forward, particularly for transportation, that need these funds in order to stick to arriving at the metrics that we committed to for, I think it was 2023, with so many miles of bike lanes being established. So there's a lot in play here that's to keep this momentum going. This capital work is necessary to do all those things that council and the mayor has asked us to do. So just want to put that plug in for those pieces. And as it relates to sidewalks, we are working on building a plan. We didn't have a plan per se beyond what we had planned for with our own forces, which was $500K, and the additional work we could quickly assemble, but we don't have a finite list as yet. It clearly ties back to our how we've structured our decision-making related to the level of importance and the level of deficiencies. So that's my little capital plug on our activities.
Thank you. Do I still have the floor, Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead, Councilor Jane. Yes.
Yes. So, I mean, I think in general, my view about this presentation is missing. What else is missing? I think the city need to think about. And I think one of them is specific to economic development. I haven't heard anything substantial or specific to that item. Economic development for the people that live, work here, and raise their children here. That's one. I am also a little bit disappointed, not hearing any substantial amount of funding for early childhood education, other than the $500,000 from the pilot fund that it seems is the only thing that the city is looking forward to invest in early childhood education. That's true. I haven't heard anything about those two items. Three, trying to tie racial justice and infrastructure, and also knowing that at Franklin Square, if you go there right now and just walk around the street, you will see the condition in which that specific neighborhood is in. I think the city had a plan, and knowing that we now receive this, I think it should be a priority, because this is about race, this is about infrastructure, and I think we need to prioritize that specific neighborhood. It's been left out for over 15 years now, but despite the progress that we have made, it's a priority to make it even better. Yeah, and in the city, that's a 3. And 4, it is specific to some issues that we encountered here in the city, especially in the South End and some part of the New North End, about neighborhood calming, speed calming. There was issue on Lucky Street. Neighbors stepped up to do their, some job that needed to be done. They were not supposed to do it. And I think here in the New North End, specifically in Ghost Court, we were told you have to wait at least 4 years in order to see some investment in terms of making the neighborhoods speedless, safer, basically, and I think those need to be also a priority. And I'm going to leave it for those points for now, and was just wondering what are the plans for those economic development, early childhood education, Franklin Square, and neighborhood calming programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Jang. Appreciate your point on the plan around Franklin Square, and do want to check in with the team and understand how the team is thinking about that and where that is in the plans. And so we'll come back to you with a response on that. With respect to childcare funding, this is, I'm not sure. I guess from my perspective, $500,000 investment is a very substantial investment. We've restored that after a year in which we had to cut it. It's essentially 100% increase over what we had last year. And this has been very much a project I personally care a great deal about and I'm committed to. And if their council wants to talk about further expansion of it, that is certainly a conversation that we could have. I will note that this is another area that, kind of like Councilor Pine alluded to, pending federal legislation could dramatically impact this area as well. Not the infrastructure bill, but the American Families Plan, the third major bill from the Biden administration, does currently have hundreds of billions of dollars in it for expanded pre-K, as well as expanded high quality childcare. And I think having $500,000 in the budget gives us a lot of flexibility and opportunity to leverage those funds, make sure Burlington is maximizing those funds before we considered major changes or dramatic expansions of the local Burlington effort. I think in that, with respect to there, it may make sense to understand where the federal government is going to get any further expansions or changes right. So those are my initial reactions on childcare. Happy to talk more offline if you have specific thoughts about how we do even more. Finally, economic development, and I appreciate the presentation didn't put a lot of focus on this, but I do think there are a couple things going on that, from my perspective, very much are the kind of economic development we need to be doing right now, coming out of this recession, supporting our downtown businesses that have had this existential threat over the last year. We are going to bring to you for next Monday a plan for approval that includes hundreds of thousands of dollars for downtown waterfront reopening this summer. And so that, that is very much an effort to jumpstart the local economy, do what we can to help the economy rebound coming out of this. In addition, we can maybe scroll back to this there. We are proposing for the second year in a row that we have the Kara Al-Nizraoui, who she's been functioning in this broader citywide support role, supporting all businesses, not just Burlington tertiary marketplace businesses. Over the first year of this emergency, we are proposing that we continue to have that expanded economic development support effort continue for at least another budget year. And in fact, there is some growth in that effort in the second year of it. So those are a couple specific ways we are trying to support the economy, support jobs, support people trying to earn a living in this economy. If you have other specific thoughts, Councilor Jang, about economic development efforts you would like to see us funding, happy to talk about that either a bit further now or offline. Happy to have that conversation with you.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. I think a little bit maybe to respond to two of items here, and I think one is about the early childhood education. And from my understanding, if $500,000 can provide, let's say, 20 slots, at least $1 million can provide 40 slots. To just think about it in a very narrow way, but not expansion of $46 million. I'm not talking about, but at least we making substantial, amount of steps in the right direction for this need that is definitely huge. It's even statewide, but I think Burlington has always been a leader. And just what I'm advocating for is just another $500,000 for that, because it's important, it's needed. And it also ties to economic development, because women's and men's will go back to work and the economy will become vibrant again. And I think, about the economic development, from my perspective, if we bring CEDO into this conversation, if you bring Church Street Marketplace, then we are talking only from the established business economic development standpoint. I think we have another branch of government called the Community Economic Development Office. And whatever CEDO is doing in terms of helping those who would want to open a new business, strengthening, current program that currently exists, and many, many other aspects. Co-ops, how do we make them, bring them as part of our economy? And I think my plan on my website is very substantial and very clear, and was just wondering if the city also can think that way a little bit, not only from a business standpoint, but from neighbors or residents standpoint, how do we help them get ahead? And happy to talk about this again further in different settings. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councilor Jang, for that. And just briefly, I don't want to keep going back and forth, but just very briefly, I may have I agree with you that we should be looking to, it's helpful to understand that's the growth you're looking for in the ELI program, is to see more and more students, more and more kids helped every year. I share that goal exactly. And we are trying to do that. The pandemic was a setback, even though we expanded eligibility and made lots of funds available for scholarships. We had trouble placing kids during the pandemic. I'm going to have Brian Lowe maybe connect with you offline to show you the growth plans and how we're, I think, thinking in very similar ways. And I agree, we should, at the time we need the investment to make that growth happen, we should make it. I'm not sure, because of the way recent years have unfolded, if that's now or not, but we'll have more conversation on that. And why don't we leave it there for now? I'll look in more to your economic development points, and thank you for that. So it's a little after 7 now. I am just sort of check in with the board. We've been going for about 90 minutes on this. I think it's, I've taken a lot of notes. From my perspective, it's been helpful preliminary discussion, and definitely not structurally, there's a lot more discussions to come. I feel like it might be good to start to move towards the reappraisal conversation relatively soon, if possible, knowing that there are other opportunities, but I see Councilor Pine has a hand up, and I think we could take a couple more questions at this point, but that's my thinking is we should be moving on soon. Go ahead, Councilor Pine.
Thank you. This is really just a request that we really move as quickly as possible to get a public meeting to really gather public feedback, public input, sort of just public reaction to this. Maybe the week of the 17th, I think would be, a goal. That's 2 weeks away. I agree with Councilor Paul, who said earlier, if we wait till June, we're really we're putting people behind the curve, if you will. So I'd like to get this, if we can, get it sooner.
Thank you. And can I say something, Mayor? Quick. Yes, sorry. Yeah, and I think it's a great point what all the councilors said about the community input. But I think we need to do more background work in order for the community to reflect on something. If we just come in a general, this is so much money we have, what do you think we need to do? I think it will not be constructive. Let's find buckets, and it's kind of like a autocracy or a survey. When people come in, they should say, we should prioritize X, Y, and Z, and not prioritize X, A, or B, in order for it to be substantial and meaningful for us about what people are thinking about.
Thank you, Councilor Chang, and I agree with you. And as noted in the prior communications, we are planning a survey for the additional process with ARPA funds that we talked about a couple times going over the course of the summer and into the fall. I think the challenge here is we have a charter responsibility to pass a budget by in the next 2 months here, and had not contemplated doing a survey as part of that process. I've heard you that's a request. I can't promise it. We'll consider it. And I've heard multiple councilors express a desire for going above and beyond what we have done in the past in terms of public engagement. And we'll come back to you quickly with how to do that in a meaningful way. All right. If there's no more hands now, and I guess I just want to make sure are there any other counselors who not on the Board of Finance who haven't had a chance to weigh in here that want to say anything before I shift to the reappraisal? Councilor Carpenter.
I don't know if I'm supposed to raise my hand or not. I just, along this vein, I mean, really, I do want to get priority input as soon as possible, but I think we need to understand the cost of doing that. And I hear what you're saying, which is to say, we have a base budget we got to get done by June. Some of the proposals, we got to figure out how we're going to pay for them, I guess is my bottom line. And so we need to know, does that mean a tax increase? For example, if we add more childcare slots and that's $500,000, is that $500,000 less of something else? Or is it $500,000 more on the tax rate? So I think any of those discussions need to be matched with theory and funding.
Yes, I do think as we get further into this process, we will, as Councilor Pine had noted, it is a principle of ours to agree we're using one-time funds to fill this budget gap. What are the long-term implications of that? Are these one-time? Is this a one-time gap, or is this something that is going to require structural commitment? And as we get further into this process, we will clarify that for the new initiatives. Okay, I am Not seeing any further camera hands up, or I don't think hands on the participants list. So I am going to,
Mr. Mayor,
okay, yes, Councilor Paul.
I think Councilor Barlow had a question.
Oh, sorry, thank you.
No worries.
Councilor Barlow, go ahead.
Thank you, Councilor Paul and Mr. Mayor. I just had one question. Early in the presentation, you talked about deferring both the public safety tax and the housing trust fund taxes. Was that anticipated in this proposal, or would that be additional to this proposal? And if it's additional, what's the potential impact there if we wanted to include it?
Okay, yeah, thank you, Councilor Barlow. So to clarify, we did defer in FY21. So these two items were approved by large numbers, by wide margins. The voters approved this at the beginning of March 2020. However, that was before the pandemic hit, and we chose, despite the voter approval, we chose not to implement those taxes last year as part of the FY21 budget. Although we were authorized by the voters to do so, we chose not to do that. What we are proposing in this presentation, for discussion at least, is implementing the public safety tax, but deferring for another year the affordable housing trust fund, the housing trust fund local tax. The housing trust fund local tax being 1 cent, so it's really not right to think of this as a 3 cent public safety tax. I don't believe at this point, because that is part, that authorization was for the old tax level. So it'll be something less than 3 cents, adjusted downwards by the growth of the grand list. It's a revenue neutral authorization. I'm almost certain. So if we want to defer that tax again, the cost of that, we would have an additional challenge of about $1.2 million essentially. So whereas we are already projecting an approximately $5 million gap at this point in the operating budget, that would rise to about $6 million. Does that address your question, Councilor Barrow?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Okay. Okay, thank you very much for the discussion. I know this was very helpful, and we got a lot to follow up on, and we will do so, and we will be back with more budget discussion very soon, including next week on the immediate needs proposal. So shifting gears now, we have heard from numerous counselors, concerns from constituents, and we have heard from some of these concerns directly in the mayor's office as well about the reappraisal, questions and concerns about it. And I do just note that kind of feedback is very helpful for us. We've tried to be very responsive to it, and I would add that to the tools for getting public feedback for the budget process. Is we certainly welcome you passing along what you're hearing from your constituents as this discussion expands on the budget side. That is one of the ways we get great public feedback. So having gotten that for the reappraisal, we've been trying to augment the initial public communications in a number of ways. And as a further step in that direction, we have the tax assessor, John Vickery, here tonight. And I think, unless Catherine, you have anything to add, we'll turn it over to John for some opening remarks and then to answer questions that you have. So John, take it away.
Well, thank you for inviting me to this meeting, and for me to what I'd like to do is actually just start back with a little bit of history about the reappraisal. I know this is the time of the year where you're probably hearing from a lot of constituents about their concerns over the reappraisal. I want to cover that as well. Before this reappraisal started, there was a couple things that we needed to do. First off, we were mandated to do the revaluation, as you all know, by the state tax department. And we knew that it was coming. So what we needed to do was we needed to migrate our property data to a new valuation software system. The old system was an older platform. It was outdated. And we wanted to bring in a good team. And I think we did that. We broke out the commercial appraiser and we landed really two superstars for this reappraisal. One was this commercial appraiser that does work all over New England and New York, doing mass appraisal work. He's been at it for over 30 years, and he is doing a fantastic job. The other one is a 35 years of doing modeling for the residential properties. And this person is another superstar in the business, and he has worked in Fulton County, Georgia, where Atlanta is, Providence, Rhode Island, Hartford, Connecticut, Portland, Maine, and he's done multiple appraisals in major cities and towns throughout New England. So that is why we selected Tyler Technologies to do the reappraisal for us. But also remember that one of the things that I wanted for this reappraisal is I wanted to use modern techniques for reevaluating properties. And that's why we had images taken overhead, obliques, and as well as street views to the highest resolution in the market. It's called sub 1 inch. And just a few years ago, the best you could do was sub 3 or 3 inch resolutions. They mosaic that, and it allows a reviewer to measure a property, to sketch overlay, to check for errors, to really look at a property from the outside. I think that saves a lot of time. It allows an appraiser to sit at the desk and do a lot of the work that way. So I come 2 years, we have the data in the newest software that is out there, very modern, and we also have we hired a reappraisal team that I believe has done a fantastic job. And I know at this time when you put out values, there's always a little pandemonium, and there's always property owners that call city council members, the mayor's office, my office, with their concerns. And what we're trying to do is guide them through the process so that they follow the appropriate channels. You know, our filing a hearing online is relatively new, but we've had that for about 3 years now. And there really hasn't been any problems with people being able to file a property appeal hearing online. That's really where there hasn't been problems. Where there has been problems is with scheduling hearings. So you file your hearing, you're in the queue, and you will have a hearing. Now you need to be contacted by a Tyler appraiser for the hearing, and you need to be scheduled. And that is where there's been a lot of aggravation with taxpayers by some bottlenecks of too many callers calling for people that are working very hard to schedule people every single day. I believe that those, well, the opportunity to hear has closed, to ask for a hearing. But if you have not scheduled, folks from Tyler will call you, or we ask them to call the Tyler folks. Actually, Tyler will call them at this point. That said, we run throughout as the models are being built. I meet with the project manager and other key players for the project. I met with them constantly, talk to them almost every day. And they would run periodic tests like every few weeks. Early on, it was probably every month. And these are statistical tests, and then calibrations would be adjusted based on the results of the test. And this happens throughout the entire project till the point where everything is compliant statistically. This is how mass appraisal works. And I think what happens is that folks see the result of their valuation, and a certain percentage of them, they understand that the market has changed, but the percentage of change has changed quite a bit. And it's their turn to have their opportunity to meet before an appraiser and to have their data corrected, and to also request, if the data is correct, to request that maybe there is something wrong with the assessment, and let's figure out what that error is. So there's that has been going on, and this is not unusual. This is normal. And for a municipality of this size, the approximate number of hearings that we've had is actually pretty healthy. If we had very few property appeals, then our values it would suggest that maybe we didn't have enough, the values are too low, or if we're hearing from 50% of the population, which we're not, then maybe there's something wrong. Although there's been a few errors, such as with the mobile homes, they're going to be reappraised soon. And we are also looking at another smaller neighborhood as an additional review because of the significant change. And I understand that the prior values were very low and the current values appear to be fine, but more work needs to be done to conduct that and to also show evidence of that. I don't want to do all the talking. People can ask me questions, but
yeah, that was a good.
Yeah,
that's a good start.
Okay.
Why don't we pause there and see if we can understand from counselors where their areas of further question interest are. So I see Councillor Jang, and then Councillor Carpenter, and then Councillor Pine, and then President Tracy.
Yes, thank you for allowing me to go first. And I have to step out in 10 minutes to go get the bus. So my first question is about what I hear from my constituents is specifically the mechanism you use to make these appraisals. And it seems people are sending questions to the city's assessor's office, but they are not receiving any response. And I always try to tell them it's all about capacity and all of that, and tidal technology is not from Burlington, but I was wondering what is that answer? And also, how is it possible for you to maybe just send a general understanding about the process used in determining the values of a certain home?
Yes, we've been very busy, but we are working on that. I have to say that I think that our website has a lot of information, and it is a higher standard than what you'd find in other assessor websites. And I'm not just trying to defend myself. I really think that we put a lot of content out there, and we've been with the help of the mayor's office and other offices, we've been very responsive to make some adjustments, like extending the deadline to appeal to 22 days when the standard's 14, and to trying to get an adjusted tax rate out as quickly as possible. It's not something easy to do, and it has to be after values are put out. But it's the best we can do. And I think that what I'm getting is that the additional request that's coming out now is, what is the formula? How did you come up with these values? And so today I had time to do some research and begin to start printing reports out. And I'm going to put that together and get it on the website for people so they understand the cost approach in a better way. They understand the formulas that we use, And that's coming. I wish I had it a couple of months ago, but it was still being built, as well as other priorities. I mean, COVID has been a real challenge of trying to stay on schedule, and we're really trying to do our best. And I also just want to let people know that I try to respond to everybody when they call. I really do, and we'll be doing that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. And this is basically, there is no need to schedule to extend the appeal, because that's not the issue. The issue is for people to actually show up and speak their mind.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. There's a few other hands.
Sorry, I believe next in the queue is Councilor Carpenter. Go ahead.
Thanks. At this point, we sort of can't go backwards. Just a general observation that I think the royal we should have done much more aggressive education sooner than we did, but perhaps we didn't. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the going forward. I do think, even though the values have all been in and now people are in the appeal process, we should continue to do much more education on how we got there, because to me, that seems to be the biggest frustration with people. And I want the people that are not appealing to have confidence in their values. I mean, I've eyeballed a lot of values, and to me, they seem very market driven, but I have spent a lot of time in real estate. A lot of people don't understand it. So I think there's still work to be done in the next couple of months on educating people that here's how we got there. Would you sell your house for that amount of money tomorrow? And probably most people would say yes, then that's a reasonable value. So I just think, even though the preliminary value is out, we should still keep the education. I think in the going forward mode, 14 days is just not enough time. And if that's a function of state law or the inner reaction from state law, then we need to make that a priority to do some work on that in the going year. In terms of we're in the budget process, I think John's office is under capacity. I mean, again, a frustration was communication. And since the assessor's office, in fact, is the biggest revenue raising department of the entire city, I think we just need to be more mindful of that. So I think, looking at future capacity issues are going to be important. And we certainly can't go 15 more years. I think we need to have a serious endeavor of maybe a 3-year goal for reappraisals. A lot of communities do rolling reappraisals, and we need to look at that. And that's a cost to the city. I mean, one reason we don't do them more often is because they cost the city money. But I think in the going forward mode, we need a much more proactive plan to say to the citizens, we're not going to let this happen again. And here's a plan to do it more readily. And, I think people are nervous that values are spiky. I mean, we know residential's hot and up, commercial's down. Is that going to be the same in 3 years from now? So I think we just need a proactive plan to address this better. And again, the degree to which the state either helps or hurts that, I think we just need to be more aggressive and with them and on that plan so that we don't get ourselves in this kind of bind in the future.
Councilor Carpenter, since you raised that, I'd actually welcome just further. Can you expand on what you're saying there? Because it's certainly, we have had a very proactive plan, but it's been a plan around minimizing how often we need to do reappraisals, because it is such an extreme expense, and because there are clear state standards that determine when a reappraisal is needed. And we worked very hard to avoid triggering a reappraisal until now. So John did do interim reappraisals and got a fair amount of criticism for it, actually, but did do interim reappraisals in identified areas of the city that were clearly spiking, as you say, that we're seeing a more significant run up in value because something going on in those markets. And because of that, that did stretch out the period of time between appraisals, which to me has some benefits to it. I mean, it's not a pleasant process. No one enjoys doing it. I think having to only do it once every 15 years seems like in some ways a win for the community. And it also saves us money. So what would be the purpose of trying to do them more often?
Well, I mean, we've gone through two significant real estate booms. I mean, I'm just looking at a street in my neighborhood with complaints, and they're ranging from 40% increases to 200% increases. In my personal opinion, I don't think the end values are off, because my gut says, looking at the market, that's what they're going to sell those homes for. But that's a wide range, and I get the cost, and that's just why I want to be educated, and it's a voter priority. But if in fact having more consistent appraisal process keeps us proportionally better, I think there's this value to that. It's always painful no matter when you do it, but if it was more of a routine part of our revenue raising process, I think it's just less painful. And when you have spiky real estate, it's hard to keep up. And this is not a criticism of the assessor's office. I'm sure they do see it, but maybe I'm off base, but I do know that lots of communities do it more often. And they have these rolling appraisal processes, and I'm not all that educated on it, but I just want us, if for no other reason, to have the public have a better understanding of it. I mean, they don't understand it.
I think that's helpful. And let's, so we got to get through this one first, but maybe when we're on the other side, let's have a kind of after action review of whether you want to change, have some kind of fundamental change in our approach like that. I think it's a interesting suggestion.
I would welcome that.
Councilor Pine.
Actually,
and then Councilor Paul. Go ahead.
Okay. I actually really agree with what Councilor Carpenter said. I think that although it could be an added cost, and one could look at what we were able to do over the last 15 years as essentially giving folks a break, it doesn't really make up for that when folks are hit with significant increases. So I think the number of folks who've contacted me tell me that there's clearly going to be some economic fallout from this that I think we will see over time. I've seen way more property for sale signs in the Old North End in my neighborhood than I have in quite some time, but that's just purely anecdotal. I think the part that is most difficult for me to explain to constituents, and I believe it is also for both you, John, and for the mayor, is the methodology is really rather complicated and rather Byzantine, I think, quite Byzantine. And so when we talk about someone selling their house, they know the most common way to figure out what the price should be is to go and look at some comparisons, go look at where the market is. And I know that was a fallback method or approach to value that was used, but this using the cost approach isn't something that I think is like a household concept that people can get their head around. So I'd like to ask John to speak about the methodology used for focus on single family homes, but I'd also be interested in hearing how you approached multifamily properties as well. And I think this is for us to understand and also for constituents that we can explain this to.
Okay. Sure. Thanks. Most people are used to the sales comparison approach because they've had financing, bank appraisals, and so forth. It's more common to use a cost approach for mass appraisal because you build the tables and all the properties get calibrated to those tables. And it's a kind of to go a little bit deeper, it's a multiplicative type of formula where you have a base cost and then multipliers that adjust from off of that base cost to a value. I'm talking about the improvement. It's more widely used for mass appraisal around the country. And we wanted to use that because the sales comparison approach inside the system usually is really designed for a check on the other approach to value. And it's mostly always secondary. And arguably, it could be a little less reliable because the sales comparison approach may grab one or two sales that probably shouldn't be in the study. They might be outlier sales, and it'll influence those values. So the cost approach, those tables are the same and they're applied to everybody. But there's multipliers depending on if you have a higher quality of building or you have more depreciation, those types of factors. That's what I want to do. I started putting the manual together because I think that's the question out there right now.
It is.
And I'll try to work on that in the next few days, and hopefully by the end of the week, we'll have something out for folks. But I also hope that if you talk to someone and they have scheduled their hearing and they're nervous because they filed their hearing, but have not heard from Tyler, send them to me and I'll make sure that they get the right number so that they can schedule their appeal. I think I answered your question, but was there, multifamily properties. Multifamily properties that are investor grade types of properties and all commercial properties, they are backed up by the cost approach because it's still used widely, but we use the direct capitalization method, which is the income approach to value. So that's the method that we widely use. We used it last reappraisal as well, and that's how those are being valued.
And you don't use actual property by property operating expenses. You use an industry standard for operating expenses for that?
Not exactly. So the modeler builds the model based on submitted income and expense forms and talking with these property owners. They build the model and then it gets applied to properties. Then if the owner submits their information about their rent roll and their expenses, as long as it's not widely different, they will use those, the actuals. And that's just like what an appraiser would do for a commercial appraiser for bank financing as well.
Great, thank you. And I think this points out one thing that is definitely not your fault at all, and it's no one's intention here. But if someone is keeping their rents well below market, but in fact the value of the property is more reflective of what you could get on the market, they're being hit with an increase in value that is going to force them to probably raise rents. And that's just it's almost a perversion of the system. I'm not blaming anyone here. I'm just saying the way the system is set up doesn't really allow for someone to continue to offer below market rate housing if the tax value drives up costs to a point where just to break even, you have to add $120 or $140 a month to the rent. So I'm hearing, and that is the experience I'm seeing and hearing from folks who try to keep their rents down. So I know that's not really a value issue as much as we have got to get away from the property tax. I mean, the property tax as a way to fund all city services and schools is just continually, it strikes me. I know it's got stability and it's got some other benefits, but in the state, income sensitivity helps a little bit on the education side. But this is another example of why the property tax is really fundamentally a regressive, unfair way to fund services.
Okay,
thanks.
President Tracy.
Thanks, Mayor. And just to expand off of Councilor Carpenter's point about the why do it sooner, I think one of the reasons that I'm seeing just anecdotally, just from what I'm seeing in the community, is that folks who did it and who are around for the last reappraisal have been helpful in being like, whoa, folks, this doesn't mean your taxes are going to go up, and really explaining it. So I think there's real value to doing it sooner because more people will have memory of it and be able to apply that to their situation and be able to navigate it themselves and potentially help others to navigate it. So I think there's just real training and community knowledge that's passed down when you do it on a sooner timeline. So that's just, to me, what I've seen and what I'm experiencing. The other piece, I think, now as we sort of head into the next phase, which is this the hearing phase, and hearing and having people challenge this, is just getting a lot of questions from folks about what to bring. Do I need to hire someone? Those kinds of pieces. I'm hearing a lot of that, like what materials are helpful to bring. And then also just wanting a sense of how likely, like, am I wasting my time? And I guess that, so those kinds of things I think are important. And I'm just wondering what kind of clarity people who have filed an appeal are getting in terms of like, hey, bring this information or bring these arguments or bring these things to the table. And then also just if you had any experience based off of the last time we did this, understanding that may not necessarily be quite a one-to-one comparison, but how, upon appeal, how many do you actually change?
Well, that last question, it's rough and it can vary every year, but I think it's around 50% get adjusted. I've had a lot of calls where I've helped coach people to ask what questions to ask, and I walk them through their property. At this point, at this level, this is the first step. I suggest that it's basically a time to gather information, learn something about the property. So I would not recommend hiring an attorney or even an appraiser for a single family home. You can, if you want, that's fine if you want to spend the money, but just making sure that the factual data is correct, having a conversation about the condition of the property, and making sure that you look at the entire property, then that appraiser will say, oh, okay, maybe we overstated the condition here. Needs to be correct. Oh, that the basement is not a full finished room. It is just a rec room. They'll pick up on those things. They'll ask the right questions, and it's not complex. And it can result in a small adjustment, sometimes a larger adjustment when real things are pointed out. Like I had a call the other day about someone where we overstated the amount of square feet by about 600 square feet on the upper floor. And that was adjusted because I had a conversation with them, and I actually remember the property from earlier, and oh yes, your second floor is a little bit unique, and I made an adjustment to that. And that's exactly what an appraiser would do for Tyler, or I should do.
Okay. All right. Well, that's helpful. Thank you so much, and really appreciate all your work on this.
Do you want me to? Counselor Carpenter?
Just, I think in terms of the education for the next few weeks is to make sure people understand, as John explained, this is not the end process. And I think people are a little freaked out about this, and, it's called a hearing, and, they still can go if they're unsatisfied with Tyler's adjustments. There is the Board of Tax Appeals, which is still sort of more low-key, even though it's quasi-judicial. And then you can go to the state board. So, I mean, I think people are a little freaked at this, and we just need to remind them that this is a time to straighten out information and hear. And if you're still unhappy, you still got 2 more bites at the apple if you really feel you've been grieved.
That's correct. I think Councillor Paul wanted to speak, but I think she just stepped off.
Oh, no. That is unfortunate, and that Councillor Paul was the one who initiated this session. John, hopefully you can if you could reach out to her even tonight, just let her know if her questions weren't answered. I hope you can answer them offline.
Okay.
Are there any, she says I lost power. She'll be back in 2 minutes. So,
Okay.
so we will not adjourn in the next 2 minutes. Thank you, Councilor Carpenter, for your suggestions on communication. And I know Samantha Sheehan from my office is on watching this, and Mayor's office will continue to work with the assessor's office to help try to support getting further communications out in the coming days. Any further questions from anyone that is here?
I have a comment.
Go
if I
ahead.
may. You want to encourage when you're talking to someone to file their homestead, because they may, I believe 70% of Burlington residents receive an adjustment from the state off of their tax bill. And that adjustment is based on salary, as we know, but it's also based on value. So if values are changing, that adjustment may be bigger. So keep that in mind and make sure that this is your obligation to file your homestead if this is your primary home. But also they may be income eligible, and that may be a big reduction in their tax bill. And we now have Councilor Paul.
Hi,
Sorry.
thanks. I lost power. One of the reasons I had brought this forward last week is because of the number of calls that I've gotten with a number of questions, and I think they're probably universal questions. And we all saw the letter. I think there are a lot of people affected by the reappraisal that are not necessarily questioning. I think are questioning the lack of what they see as a lack of transparency in the process. They don't necessarily understand. It's not that they're really questioning the values directly, but they're just trying to grapple with how some of these values came about. And I sat in, as you know, John, on one, a meeting with Tyler. Never knew there was so much jargon when it comes to property reappraisal. I guess you can say that about every industry. The person from Tyler, Blaine, the project manager, spoke in a lot of jargon.
You did.
Personally, I thought it was rather dizzying. I couldn't really keep track of exactly what he was saying. He kept on referring to an algorithm and started tossing around a lot of acronyms that I think to the average person would be pretty beyond the comprehension of people who are not in the business. And so if you're going to come up with if you're going to give an explanation, I would just ask that it be in a way that that the property owners can understand. The other thing that was very sort of didn't quite understand is that in the tax book that is online, you have a fairly extensive list of comparables. And so recent sales, and not knowing, at least at the outset, most people took those sales and started using them for comparison, only to find out that that really wasn't how you were doing these calculations, that they really were based on cost. So if they're really based on cost, I'm not really sure why we have the comparables there. And if we are just having them there for educational purposes, then we should say that, so that people don't spend a lot of time trying to compare themselves to a property when in fact that's not really how single family homes were being done. The other thing also is, I think there were a number of people that I spoke with who were very hesitant to come forward and request a hearing because either, number one, they thought that there was always a possibility that by having a hearing, their property value could actually increase. and they were concerned that, well, you know, gee, I mean, I get on with an appraiser that doesn't live here, doesn't know my neighborhood, doesn't, you know, has never been in the inside of my home. You know, without representation, am I making a mistake by having a hearing when in fact I may walk away with my property value now $50,000 more than when I started? And then there was also a concern that I heard from people that if I come forward with a hearing, does that mean, because a lot of people will go and compare themselves to other homes on their street or in their neighborhood, does that mean that I may be putting a neighbor of mine at risk, that they will have a higher valuation by virtue of me bringing that forward? So I think there was a lot of confusion about how this process works. And I think that led to, you know, just frustration and, you know, and anger on the part of people who are just wondering, because as we all know, this is a really big deal. I mean, despite what we may be saying today about rolling appraisals and all of that, this is a very costly endeavor. And usually you don't do it unless you have to. And people are going to be living with these appraisals potentially for another 15 years. So I think we just have to be mindful of that. That's all.
Well, Councilor Paul, you made a lot of good points, and I'd like to address some of those. The cost approach to value, those values are calibrated to the market, and they're calibrated on those sales. So those sales from the list that is in the spreadsheet were used to build the tables. And so that's the connection to those sales. But we also want to put them out there because we want people to say, well, what sales did you use? Well, here's the sales that we used. And then they can actually array them and find the sales in their neighborhood, the sales on their street, and look at those and kind of get a sense of, is my valuation in that range of this sales set versus not putting them out at all. And I think that we want to do that, but maybe our messaging needs to change a little bit. And I'm hoping that if I can get a sort of a manual out or build it with the tables that use to help set these values or calibrated to each property value, I can put some literature out that is in layman terms that I think will be beneficial. And I started working on it today. I just need to put other things aside, I think, and just start focusing on this because this is important enough. I agree.
The other thing also is that, you know, while the window for appeals closed on Friday, you know, as we all know, this process is far from over. And, you know, people will get a letter in June. I think that it probably would be best that whenever the letter comes, that it specifically spell out exactly what you can do next if you are still not, for whatever reason, satisfied or feel that you weren't heard on one issue or another, that you know what the next step in the process is. That's something that I don't know that we did a good enough job with the letter that people got in early April. And we probably need to spell it out specifically, step by step. What is the Board of Assessors? Who's on the Board of Assessors? What does, you know, each step, so that people have a really good understanding. I think that would, again, just less confusion and taking up a lot of your time with, you know, answering, you know, many of the same questions over and over again. Doesn't mean that people won't ask them, but I think it will be a little bit less laborious. You're a small department. And then the other thing I just wanted to say, John, is that, you know, I do feel that in the times that I have reached out to you over the last 3 weeks, which is probably more time than you and I have spent on the phone in a long time, if I add up a number of years. And you have been, I think, very responsive. I've had constituents say the same thing, that you have been there, that you have listened intently. And I think that's what people want, is just to know that when they're on the phone with Tyler, that 15 minutes is not a lot of time. People just want to be heard. And I think that was the other thing that I've heard, is that, you know, they've had their hearing and they just didn't feel that necessarily they were really being intently listened to. So I would just pass that along as well. And thank you for your time.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, John, for being here tonight and answering everything. And thank you for the follow-up that you've talked about tonight. I want to thank the counselors for the discussion and flagging some areas for future work, both during this the rest of this process and beyond. We have gone, it is almost 8 o'clock. I'm thinking we are ready for adjournment tonight, and look forward to, I see some nodding heads, so I'm going to go ahead, and if there are no objections, we'll adjourn the Board of Finance at 7:57 p.m. and we'll look forward to reconvening the board next Monday for more work and significant budget season ahead. Thank you all for the very helpful meeting. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.